no good options. That was the incredibly stark message here today from the Justice Secretary as she announced what she knows is a risky strategy, releasing a raft of prisoners early starting in September. Now, in a blistering attack, as you mentioned, on her predecessors, she called the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his government the guilty men. Guilty, she said, of leaving her facing a choice between a prison system on the verge of collapse, so close to capacity it couldn't even cope with an outbreak of bedbugs, or, she said, the complete and utter collapse of law and order. Now, there is a very clear strategy here. Make absolutely plain the huge scale of this crisis. Make absolutely plain that it is a crisis not of your making, and hope that the public accept how you're trying to fix it and give you the time to do it. At least that's the plan. Prison after prison, an entire system in crisis. A crisis now this government's responsibility. Today, the new Justice Secretary visited Bedford Prison, one of 5 jails effectively put into special measures. Prisoners said to be left penned in squalor, in rat-infested, filthy wings, safety not guaranteed. But the most immediate element of this crisis is overcrowding. And today, she announced her plan for trying to relieve some of the pressure in a system at boiling point.
Those responsible, Sunak and his gang in number 10, should go down in history as the guilty men. The guilty men who put their political careers ahead of the safety and security of our country. It was the most disgraceful dereliction of duty I have ever known. The last government left us with a time bomb ticking away. If we fail to act now, we face the collapse of the criminal justice system and a total breakdown of law and order.
There are just over 700 prison places left across the entire adult prison estate in England and Wales. The prison system's been working at 99% capacity for more than 18 months, a situation described as catastrophic. Without urgent action, prison sources predict August bank holiday could be a tipping point. The emergency measures announced today could see thousands more prisoners released early after serving less than half their sentence. Will it be enough? This is not a new plan, but an acceleration of an early release scheme introduced by the Conservative government last October. More than 10,000 prisoners let out early since.
Unless and until more money is put in, we will lurch from crisis to crisis.
Middlesbrough solicitor Simon Walker told us he and other lawyers are seeing offenders let out without any notice. Tents or sleeping bags often the only support. The inevitable consequence of early release for some, a pretty early return to jail. One of his clients, he says, a perfect illustration of an imperfect plan.
He's got mental health problems, he's got drug problems. He was released on the 9th of May. He'd expected to be released on the 6th of June, and that was the target date for the provision of somewhere for him to live. He was released on the 9th of May to homelessness.
He didn't want to be released.
He didn't want to be released without having somewhere to go to. He committed offences on the 10th, 11th and 12th over the weekend of that weekend, was back in court on the Monday, and is now doing a longer sentence than the one that he would otherwise have completed had he been allowed to complete it in June.
So on no level has that worked?
No, it's completely failed.
Having overseen the explosion in the prison population and introduced early release themselves, one former Conservative Justice Secretary today still keen to offer advice to his successor.
It's the first time in many years that we've hit this particular situation, but it's clear to me that whilst measures do have to be taken, that it is incumbent upon officials and ministers to make sure they don't release people who could pose a risk to the public, and I would expect the highest degree of scrutiny before any prisoners are released early.
The government insists that no sexual, violent or terrorist offenders will be eligible for early release. But a probation manager, who asked to remain anonymous, told us with probation already under severe strain, a raft of early release prisoners can only make things worse.
We know from previous serious further offences that sometimes risk assessment hasn't been done accurately. Sometimes inexperienced staff are holding too many challenging cases, aren't having enough supervision from their manager, are in a team that's stretched with sickness absence, so they're covering for colleagues. So, yeah, the likelihood of there'll always be serious further offences, but we need to be able to do all we can to assess and manage and minimise that. And if staff are under-resourced, then that's going to be very challenging.
Visiting HMP Five Wells in Wellingborough this afternoon, the Lord Chancellor said her plan would provide proper support for prisoners and protection for the public. Prisoners being released currently under the current system, we're being told that they're being released without housing, without any support, some given tents and a sleeping bag and effectively told to just get on with it. This scheme makes the potential for that much worse, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't actually. This scheme, once implemented, actually it's one sentence calculation, so it does give probation the time to do all of the bits of their job that they would normally do, not in a rushed manner where they cannot plan and prepare and make those those release plans, in the usual way. I believe that this scheme is better for probation staff and therefore safer for the public as well.
There is risk here, and the government knows it. For now, it's a crisis they inherited. But if their plan fails, that argument soon fades, and it will be a crisis of their very own.
Well, with me here is Mike Trace, Chief Executive of the Forward Trust, which is part of a consortium due to run a new prison in East Yorkshire opening next year. This government hasn't had the time to change probation, mental health support, drug services. This is going to end in tears, isn't it?
It's a big challenge. I mean, we've got to say they've been thrown something of a hospital pass by the previous administration, but something had to be done and something had to be done quickly. This is a numbers crisis that had been brewing for many years. So I actually commend the government for grabbing hold of it day one. Prime Minister committed to picking this up, and Shabana Mahmood has taken some action today. So it's great that they're taking it seriously, but it is a tough job.
But isn't it just a sort of a temporary reduction in numbers, knowing that half of them will be back in?
Yeah, big challenges. This had to be done. Something had to be done because prisons are full. So there had to be an initiative now. The important thing to look at now, and what I call on the Ministry of Justice, is really watch implementation closely for the reasons your video showed. Is if you just throw a lot of people out on the streets, homeless, same problems they went in with, they'll be cycling round causing more crime and more problems. If you do this carefully, get people placed into the right support and released carefully under the right arrangements, then this can be a turning point.
But that's already not happening, is the point. So can you quickly change all the support systems that are outside prison to stop, a repeat and intensification of what's been happening for months?
Well, Shabana Mahmood made a good point there about this 40%. One of the reasons they've chose this initiative is at least you can predict the date when each individual is coming out. So that is a help on what was happening last week, the week before. But yes, you have to absolutely invest in probation. Specifically, probation has been underfunded for many years, and invest in the interventions that will keep those people out of prison. That's not an easy job. As Keir Starmer said, you can't do that in 1 week, but at least they've showed the intent to take it seriously.
Shabana Mahmood's department is an unprotected department in terms of spending. No. So they're probably going to be facing real terms cuts.
Yeah. So
can you do this without more money?
No. So in the long term, a long-term plan to not keep cycling around this problem needs some really careful attention. As I say, I commend the government for grabbing hold of the immediate crisis, but they will need a long-term plan to make the numbers add up.
I mean, the prison system in England is it's got some really old, terrible prisons and some brand new ones, and you're involved in, a brand new one. How are things being done differently there, and why would we think that would work?
Well, the prison we're involved in isn't opening up till next year, but what we're looking for and what we're happy to be involved in is a different way of thinking about prison management, that rehabilitation and reducing the crime committed by people leaving prison is absolutely the priority. So these new prisons, they need to be built, they need spaces, and a lot of the existing estate is crumbling, so we do need to build new prisons. Those prisons have to be very cleverly designed so they achieve what we all want, is reducing the crime. Now, they've shown Ministry of Justice that they are willing to be creative in how they put that together, but they've got to deliver on it. And as you say, that's by no means assured. And that's the big challenge to Shabana Mahmood and her colleagues.
Now, we saw the new Prisons Minister, James Timpson, sitting on the front row, but he's been quite quiet so far since being appointed. And it might be because of an interview he did on this programme, actually, in which he talked about a third of prisoners being the ones who should definitely be there, a third who should really be in some sort of other institution, and a third probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So is sentencing the real issue here? And is there any sign that the rest of the government's going to embrace that?
I think sensible planning and policy is what's needed, and my sector is very welcoming of James Simpson's appointment. We see in that a sign that they are going to take this seriously, and employment of ex-offenders, rehabilitation. He's somebody who's many times supported that. What he said about the way to think about who should be in prison and who doesn't need to be in prison is spot on. Absolutely. We have to find a sentencing regime that absolutely keeps those dangerous people in prisons, and there's a lot of them, but there are many people who would be better dealt with out in the community, receiving drug and alcohol treatment, receiving support services, and that will reduce crime, and that's what everybody wants.
But victims do want punishment, don't they? And they want that security of knowing that the person who did something to them has been put away.
Yeah,
and not just in violent crime, in all crime.
Yeah, and that's a difficult balance to draw for the criminal justice system, for any minister. But there's an awful lot we can do for those victims to say, yes, your perpetrator's being punished, but also the sensible things are being done to make sure they don't do it again. There's an awful lot of scope for that from a determined minister, and we know James Simpson will be a determined minister.
How long would it take to turn this around?
Longer than a week. That's the only thing I think is absolutely true. I think you've got to talk about the ambitions of this Parliament. So you've got 5 years.
5 years.
I would expect to see a real turnaround in the way this challenge is approached in the next 5 years.
Mike Trace, thank you very much.
Thank you.